Hey guys, welcome to Living in the Aftermath. This is Lyndsey, your weekly trauma host. And this week we are joined by Grace. And I met her on the interwebs. She was on a podcast that I was also on, and I messaged her because she and I share the fact that we are both survivors of domestic violence. And she now advocates for women and is a voice for them in such a cool way. And so I messaged her and she said yes. And so welcome, Grace. I cannot wait to hear your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I love any opportunity to talk about it in a very raw way and hopefully reach the person on the other side listening wherever they're at in their journey. I just want to try to talk about it in a way that they can really relate.
I think that's what I appreciated when I watched your episode with Shell is that is kind of how I approach it as well. I think that unless we are willing to go back into the depths of how we felt in that moment, how are other people going to be like, no, that's what I went through? Because I think when I was in the depths of it, I did question whether anyone else was going through it or whether that was real. And I always in my head was like, well, I don't see what happens behind closed doors. So how would I know? And so I think that unless there's people that are willing to get raw and in it, then there's no way that people would know and relate to that. So I think that's such a beautiful thing that you and I share.
Absolutely.
Well, where do you feel like your story begins?
Yeah, my story began about, gosh, now it's like years ago. I guess it was back in 2018. That is when I met this individual who I would have eventually a full blown relationship with. And that's how I ended up in the cycle of abuse. And I think what people really get wrong about the cycle of abuse is also how slow it starts. When I came across this person in life, it never jumped out to me as abusive relationship or something that would even be in that vicinity. I didn't even know what that was at all. I thought abuse was, okay, someone getting punched, someone getting hit. I never knew really what it was about at all. So when I met this individual, I always say he practically shook my hand and said, I'm problematic. I am trouble. And I say that because I don't want people to feel shame if they fell into something where they knew pretty much up front that this person probably wasn't right for them. And oftentimes that's the case. We hear a lot of stories where women fell in and they're like, he was amazing at first. It was just like love bombing left and right. I never ever saw this coming. And then you have other people where it's like, yeah, actually I did see red flags that were really strong and I still fell into the trap somehow. So that was my
Yep.
story right from the start. I knew he had a drug problem. I knew that there were problematic things, but I didn't know anything about addiction. And the fact that I knew this person was struggling with addiction, I thought, well, I feel sorry for them. He's really trying to take the right path in life. And it was almost this attractive thing of he knows what it's like to go through stuff and he's doing everything in his power to get on the right path. So it kind of romanticized the beginning of our relationship. And I just thought, well, I really like this person, so I should give him the benefit of the doubt that just because someone is struggling doesn't mean we can't have a good relationship. Abuse and addiction are two different things, which we can talk about throughout this episode, but that was the start. Okay, I'm with someone who I feel super obsessed with right off the bat, and he's just going to get to that other side, and that's okay. That's what I thought.
One thing that I think as you keep talking, and I feel like I dismissed when I was a teenager because I think adults said this phrase to me, and I kind of was like, I know better than you because I live my life, was kind of my mindset as a teenager, right? But I think now, the more I've talked to people in trauma, I know I fell in love with my abuser's potential. And it sounds like you kind of have the same kind of experience. And I think that phrase gets almost used a lot to where it is kind of irritating to hear sometimes. But if you think about it, I think that is what happens every single time. If you're not falling in love with who the person is then, and you're falling in love with someone's potential, it turns problematic more times than not, I would assume.
Yeah. And I'm a big believer that it's actually harder to get out of something in some aspects when you haven't entered a full blown relationship with them yet. Maybe it's what we call a situationship. I really don't like that word, but it's harder to get out of something before you enter a full blown commitment with them because you're constantly falling in love with the potential. And you're
Yep.
attached to something that has not grown to a full blown thing yet. So you're actually become more attached on the what ifs and the daydreaming about them and the ruminating versus going through an entire turbulent relationship. Now that comes with its separate challenges that can be equally difficult, but it's harder in a different type of hard when the
Yes.
relationship is just starting and you feel like you're kind of chasing after them and there's just all this unfinished business. That was the whole start of my relationship with him. It was like he was always struggling with his addiction stuff. And that created this opening where we could never get very far into the relationship. And so it was always, that attachment to, well, what could it be? And that is what kept
Yeah.
me glued in for so long. And because majority of the beginning phases with him was we just have to wait until he's a little more healed with his addiction stuff. It also made him seem non-controlling at first and made it seem like I wasn't with an abusive person because he was willing to give space sometimes and like work on his stuff. So I thought, well, if I was really in domestic violence, even though there was already mistreatment happening, I thought, wouldn't this person be like hounding me about locking me in and getting things locked down and wanting to claim me and control me? That's not really what it was for a long time. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of women miss that. If their abuser frequently discards them, which we can talk about more today, if discarding is part of the cycle, they think, well, he's willing to walk away from me. How could this be abuse if he's left me again?
Yep.
That was another theme for me.
Yeah. Well, and I remember my abuser always making me feel like no one else would ever want me. And it is so weird for me to think back to now because I couldn't ever identify what led me to that thought process. But by the end of it, I very much believed that. And that was a really hard thought process for me to overcome. And I think all of abuse happens so subtly. And I think someone said it to me one time. They're like, well, yeah, no one starts out hitting you. And I was like, well, no, if they did, who would stay?
Oh, and the perpetrator knows that. They know what line not to cross to actually accomplish control. I was just writing a post today about how abusers are not just these out of control creatures. They're actually experts at managing. They don't just lose
Yes.
control. They're experts at managing you, which means they know what bounds to stay within so that you don't leave them. So that when you try to leave them, you question yourself, well, wait a minute, he didn't do that thing. And I'm hearing in this other person's story, their abuser did this thing to them and he didn't do that thing. So they
Yes.
know how to keep you where they want you.
My abuser was an amazing salesman. I still, to this day, think that he probably holds that trait. It was something so mesmerizing for me to watch. And now that you say that, he was with corporate T-Mobile and they would transfer him from store to store and he would get it up and functional and he knew how to motivate people how to sell. And it was this thing that I fell in love with. And so I never saw it as a problem until it was turned on me. And he knew all of my triggers. He knew how to hit them all in the most subtle ways to where it didn't seem obvious. And it did make me feel like I was crazy. And I think that that is something that so many people miss because it should look a certain way and it doesn't. I think even isolation, I justified the isolation because he never told me, don't hang out with your family. I made that choice because he made the relationship with them so hard because we would argue about things and so I chose to end the relationship. And so I never put it on him because it was a choice that I made. But it took me being out of that relationship for me to clearly see that I would never have admitted that in the relationship, even if someone would have laid it out in front of me.
Yes, that is so important. So, as my relationship progressed with him, and we were now boyfriend and girlfriend and very exclusive, that was probably one of the biggest struggle points for me. I actually became extremely controlling. And what I mean by that is the cycle of abuse for me operated like addiction on my brain. This isn't the case for everyone, but I was extremely trauma bonded, which means you're attached to the same person who gives you those high highs and those low lows. And so I actually became so controlling that I would self isolate myself from everybody around me so that nobody could touch my relationship with him. I knew that things were turbulent and I knew that there were struggles with us. So I never let anybody get close to that because I didn't want them to tell me that I couldn't see him anymore.
Hmm.
But who was really orchestrating that? Who was really designing it that way? It was him. They're the ones that actually lead you to make that choice because they make your relationship so difficult that you're like, okay, if outsiders try to rock the boat with him and he's going to punish me for some reason. He's going to either
Yes.
threaten to run away. And when he threatens to run, I go into a complete panic and I need him to breathe.
Hmm.
So they know that they have us wrapped around their finger like that. So I pushed away close friendships. It was easier to just not go out with friends because if I didn't go out with them, he couldn't accuse me of anything. And also, they wouldn't get a close up look then of the turbulence of the relationship, which allowed me to protect what I felt that I needed. I often tell people it's so dangerous because I became willing to lose anything and everything to this relationship, which is kind of what addiction does to you.
Yes.
Addiction is doing the same thing over and over despite the negative consequences it's having on your life. And that was me
Yeah.
all the way. I didn't care what I lost at all as long as I kept the peace with him.
Yeah. One question that I have with his addiction, was that something that was open in his life? Were you sharing that with like your friends and family that that was something that he was struggling with, or was that a secret you were keeping for him? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, actually, he was very open about his addiction with everyone in his life, with me. I'll get to the dynamic with my parents, but he was very open about it. And
Mhm.
that is why it masked everything else because he seemed to be a very forthcoming and honest person, which he was in the sense of, hey, I'm an addict. He was struggling with crack cocaine actually and other substances before that. But that's what hit everything for me because it totally masked the fact that he was a manipulator. And I
Mhm.
think when people deal with this, I know this was the case for him. I think the abuser can be forthcoming in many ways. That doesn't take away from the fact that they're a domestic abuser. Okay, two things can be true at once. Now, they can be lying to you about a bunch of stuff, but in some areas, they are very honest because it costs nothing to them for them to be honest.
Exactly.
He could be open about his addiction because it gave him more attention, allowed everybody to rally around him and give him a lot of attention about his struggles. And it also distracted everybody from the real issue, which was his thinking problem. Abuse
Yeah.
happens because of their attitude, their belief system. So nobody ever challenged him about his belief system towards women because everybody just thought he's just struggling. So
Yeah.
if your abuser is someone who is forthcoming about their past or something else that they're dealing with, that doesn't change the fact that you're still being abused by them.
Yes. Well, one comment guest and her father had passed away. And she said, the one thing that I've learned is that people compare traumas and they try to dismiss or minimize their trauma and say, oh, well, it's not anything compared to what you've been through. No one else has to give you permission to be unhappy or think this maybe doesn't fulfill me completely. No one else needs to give you that permission. And I think that was such a foreign concept to me in my abusive relationship because I think I was constantly looking for permission to do all things. And I think now when I go and talk to high schoolers, I tell them that before I got with my husband now, I did not believe that someone who genuinely loved you wanted you to choose yourself because I had been made to believe that choosing myself was selfish. If I thought about myself before my spouse or my children or anyone else, that that was me being so selfish and inconsiderate. And I have now learned that I am the only one that is inside my head. I am the only one that knows what I want when I want it. It is my job to care for me, and people that love me want me to do that because that's how I am fully happy as well. And that was such a foreign, unreal concept. And now when I talk about it, it sounds so stupid because it seems like it should be common sense. But that was definitely something that I struggled with in that realm of manipulation and abuse. And again, it's just so crazy to me how many parts of your life it can affect without you even realizing it.
Yeah, and another thing that I see in the narcissistic abuse community that I think is a bit of a downfall because I know this is what kept me stuck during that time frame when I still didn't know I was in domestic violence. There's this message in the narc abuse community that everything that this person has ever done makes the entire relationship a lie. Like your entire thing with your abuser and everything that they've ever said and done to you was with complete malicious intent and the whole thing is a lie and they've had this big evil plan from the start. It's true to some extent and some things are absolutely malicious and intended. Many things are.
Yes.
However, when you say that to a victim who's in the cycle, they're not going to be able to hear anything else you say at that point. They're not going to trust you because how do I
You just
put it?
invalidated their whole life.
Well, an abuser operates from a broken value system. They're abusive
Mhm.
because they have an attitude problem and a thinking problem, and they are operating from that. But that doesn't mean every little interaction you've ever had with them is evil and malicious. So, two things can be true at once. And I think survivors trust you more when you recognize, hey, some of the good times were genuine, but they're always going to abuse you again and again forever. They're never going to change still. But
Yeah,
that doesn't mean
I
every
agree.
little interaction you've ever had with them is a lie.
Well, had someone said that to me about my 18-year relationship and my 3 children, and I really believed that, I think that that could be really detrimental to my thought process and my healing. One thing that I have recently contemplated in my mind, when I would talk about this, I would say that I believed I loved him, or I don't remember exactly how I worded it because I always really struggled with if I loved him or if he loved me, because how do you love someone that does that to you? But the more I sat and thought about it and the more I reflected, I did. I loved him with every part of me. I gave every part of myself. I believe that he loved me to some extent, whatever that was. But I think it took me a really long time to admit that I did love him and not hold so much guilt on myself, because it is kind of humiliating to say that I love someone that almost killed me. That sounds crazy, but I did. And the more that I sat and fought that and tried to justify it, the more confusing it felt inside. I did love him. I loved him deeply. I believed that that's what love was. And it took me coming out of that and being in a relationship of real love to see that I really didn't know what that was, but how would I know that?
Right, exactly. And so it was an interesting dynamic that this person was an addict, and yet I was actually operating from an addiction mindset as well due to the
Yeah.
turbulence of the relationship. And I remember at one point, I mean, back then I used to try to post stuff on Reddit and Google, is this abuse? Is it normal when your boyfriend, A, B, or C? Is it normal when your husband? When you start Googling stuff like that, you know something's wrong. And people would respond because we didn't have ChatGPT back then. I was just inputting these oddly specific scenarios into Google and hoping I got something back. And I remember people were saying, girl, run. He's abusive. And I remember feeling a weird sense of relief. Okay, good. This is domestic violence. Good. Because the most painful thing that someone ever said to me was, well, maybe you're just incompatible. Maybe you're just not right for each other. Because what did that do to my head? It made me think, okay, I'm not enough for him. Like, if he gets with another woman after me, does that mean he's not going to abuse her? I don't want anybody to be
Mhm.
hurt, but it messed with my head thinking, okay, maybe this is just a compatibility issue or a communication issue, because it always left me feeling like there's something else I can try harder with to produce a
Yes.
different outcome. And that's the most dangerous thing to say to someone. So hearing, hey, this has a word for it. You're being abused. That allowed me to be like, okay, if I walk away from this and get free, it's gonna be the right decision.
Yeah.
So that was relieving.
I'm so happy that that is the response that you got. Am glad that people listened to what was happening to you. And maybe, I think now that I'm saying it out loud, maybe it's because I was going to people that were close to me, that loved me, that were emotionally connected to my well being and what was happening to me. And I think trauma makes people uncomfortable, or abuse especially makes people uncomfortable. It's not a comfortable topic, right? And so when I would start to bring things up and be like, well, this feels weird, this maybe doesn't feel okay, I would get the, well, marriage is hard, you need to be there to support each other, dismissed, because no one really wanted to dig into the depths of what was happening because it was uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think a big aspect of why I kept going back time and time again, and why when we're operating in that trauma brain that we can't see clearly and we make a decision that people do not understand, a big reason I would fall back is you have to understand this was my world. If
Mhm.
I was without him, if I made a wrong choice, if I thought I was misstepping, I felt like I was going to miss out on the best thing ever. I felt like if I took the path away from him, what if there's one more thing I could have tried that would again bring that different outcome with him? And to me, that felt like too big of a risk at the time versus going and getting safety. It felt like it was the biggest risk in the world to risk missing out on what was just about to come with us, because the abuser
Yeah.
is always promising you, if you give me one more chance, you're going to get that outcome. And if you don't, you're going to miss out. So they instill
Yes.
the fear of missing out in you. And to me, that just felt like the biggest risk in the world, such that I was willing to risk essentially my life. I was willing to risk my well being and anything to make sure I didn't miss out, because they put themselves on that pedestal so much so that then the outsiders don't understand. Well, why does she keep trying again? Well, it's because he made me
Yes.
always think, Grace, there's one more angle that you didn't hit that's going to bring about something different with me.
Yes. And one thing I did kind of relate to it was when a relationship starts out and it's going so well and everything is functional. And then all of a sudden you have not done anything differently. You're not showing up any differently for them. You're like your behaviors are all the same, but the relationship has changed. And then this other person is saying, no, like, what is your problem? What's going on? Human nature for you to revert back and be like, okay, well, holy crap, what am I doing differently? What am I doing wrong to mess this up? Because it was going well, and now it's not going well, and they're
Yeah,
telling me they haven't changed, so it has to be me, and that is a really confusing, hard mental place to be, especially when I think that abusers are really good at making you question your own thoughts and your reality at a very early stage on in the relationship without you even knowing that it's happening.
totally. And another aspect to my story, I mentioned this a bit ago, was the constant discarding. Maybe not constant in my case, but there were several bouts of discarding where my ex, he would say to me, maybe we're just not compatible, Grace. You're not as passionate about the things that I'm passionate about. He was big into working out, which I am too, but he was into bodybuilding. And one time he broke up with me because he said I just wasn't in it enough. I just wasn't as passionate as him. And it was becoming a turn off for him that I wasn't taking certain things as seriously. And therefore he broke up with me temporarily. And I can remember him sending me a text that said, well, you're like driving a Lamborghini in third gear. Essentially saying, I have all this potential, but I'm never living up to that potential. I'm always just below that potential. So experiencing me is like being with something that could be great, but his experience with me just isn't great. And he said to me in that same text, you can't take an apple and turn it into an orange. He was coming up with all these weird, oddly specific analogies that were so hurtful. And they sound so silly and stupid and like, what does that even mean? But he was trying to knock me down, and I remember he
Yes.
broke up with me like, "You're like driving a Lamborghini in 3rd gear." I was like, "Whoa, sorry?" And that would again leave me feeling like I must not be in an abusive relationship because this person just ended things with me based on quote unquote incompatibility. So I thought, then when people were telling me, "Grace, he's bad, he's abusive," I was like, "No," because he's willing to walk away when he's uncomfortable.
I very much relate to that. So as a kid, my parents would tell me all the time, stop talking, you'll get in trouble less if you stop talking, which I mean, rightfully so. I talk a lot. I still do. But I remember I always felt kind of insecure speaking. I graduated high school, but that was it. I never had ambitions or dreams beyond that. And so I felt kind of uneducated and like I didn't belong places. And so I remember he came to me and he was like, I don't want you to sound stupid. So maybe you just shouldn't talk when we're out in public. And I remember in that moment feeling so grateful to him because I was like, oh my heck, he cares about me so much that he doesn't want me to sound stupid when we're out in public. That was my thought, not that he was making me doubt my own thoughts or that I should have a voice or that I am allowed to speak in public or different things like that, which it all very much did. In that moment, he framed that as like, I'm doing this because I care about you. And I was grateful to him for that. And so I kind of like when you were speaking, it's so funny because I say all the time abusers are not unique. They all do very similar things.
Well, and it reminds me of another part of the manipulation with our relationship. I'm a more quiet person, I'm soft spoken, and that has always been a bit of an insecurity, the fact that I'm more quiet. But he would capitalize on that because he was very loud and just passionate person. He was also half Cuban, so he would often weaponize cultural stuff, claiming that, well, he's just louder than me because his family is louder. No, he was yelling at me. Anytime I would call him out for stuff, he'd blame it on that. But it was always, well, you're too quiet. I'm just loud. Always throwing off that reference point of what's normal and what's not. So he made me feel so much smaller that I just had a different personality with him and it made me feel less beautiful to him. There was always the competition of like other women around him. I just remember feeling like I was never enough. My body wasn't a certain way. I was losing weight constantly because of him. And he always was like, I want someone super curvy. You need to eat more. It's like you're with someone who has a plan to make you feel smaller and mentally, physically, while they're harping on you about becoming this larger than life person. It's such a mental game.
Yes. Well, and I think it just comes back to their words being one thing, but it being completely different in reality. And that's what makes it confusing for our reality, right? Because the words are not matching what's happening. And so it makes you feel like you have to be the crazy one. And I think too, it took me a really long time to realize that I was never going to understand the mindset of my abuser. When he was arrested the first time, I went back to him, and my thought was not, I need to divorce him because he hit me or anything like that. My thought was, now he's got to know what he's doing is wrong because someone else is telling him what he was doing is this is wrong. It wasn't me anymore that was saying, you need help. He was arrested. And the reason I had that thought process is because that would be my thought process. That was not his thought
Yes.
process. But that's where it gets confusing because we have the normal thought process. And so when someone does something that's completely off of that, it is so easy to stop trusting yourself.
And that's so key because a big part of my story was also sexual abuse with him. And that was the main form of physical stuff I would say that was happening. But anytime an incident would happen, it would bring me to that same point. Okay, wow, this really bad thing happened. So I can't walk away now because now he's going to finally be enlightened as to how bad this is and how serious this is. So if
Mhm.
I walk away at this point where he finally did the thing that I said I would never put up with, well, again, that next woman's going to get the version of him that I have suffered for. That's not going to happen. I'm
Mhm.
just explaining the mental process of a survivor. That's why there was never, ever a point where I was like, okay, this is a good exit point because it left me
Mhm.
with that thought every time. Well, if
Yes.
I take this exit, this is the thing I've been waiting for that will hopefully wake him up. And if someone else is telling him, hey, this is wrong, when he finally got arrested, I went back again because I thought the same thing. Oh my gosh, well, he's gone to jail now. And now he's saying this really woke him up. So I don't want to miss that.
Up, and it's so messed up to say it out loud, but in the moment, I don't know what anyone could have said to me to convince me of anything different. There wasn't. There were multiple people trying to tell me not to do that, and no words would have changed that moment for me. I had to go back,
Exactly.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I would say just the whole addiction aspect when an
Yes.
abuser is also a substance user. I do believe that part for him was very real. Like, you can have problems with addiction and still be a domestic abuser, but it's two separate issues, and your lifeline needs to be viewing it as two separate issues. I want anybody facing that. I don't care if they have a porn addiction, I don't care what it is. Now, porn could make them potentially more violent towards you, especially sexually. It can normalize things. So that can interact with the violence directly. Just like if someone who's an alcoholic or a drug user, when they're high or drunk, sure, it can make the abuse towards you more acute and rear its worst head. But I still want people to see it as two separate mental issues because when it cross interacts, when you blame it on the addiction, you're going to be stuck forever,
Well,
truly.
it gives you an outlet. So, obviously, I love podcasts. So, I don't know if you saw Adriana, that was also on Shell's podcast. Her husband passed away from an overdose. And she talks about what an amazing husband and father he was despite his addiction and her not really understanding what addiction looks like or what that is. And I think that this is such a beautiful example of, yes, he struggled with this one thing, but if you give it a crutch, I think you're never going to overcome it. You've got to view it as two separate things because it is two separate things. So I love that advice because I think that's so true. Just because you're one doesn't mean you're the other.
Exactly. And so the reason I say if you don't see it as two separate things, you're going to be stuck in it forever is because your abuser is going to perpetually use that to say you're going to miss your chance because every time they get sober again, they're going to tell you, I'm finally trying so hard. Look, because my
Hmm.
ex used to say to me, Grace, I've been sober for 6, 7, 8 months. He was trying really hard in that aspect. So that kept my hope alive. That kept that fear of missing out at an all time high for me. And I was constantly measuring him by whether he was sober or not whether he
Yep.
was a positive partner or not. Right, because even when he was
Yes.
sober, there was still the digs, "Why are you doing this that way?" Or if I went out with my friends, or if I was telling him a story, "Why did you tell the story that way? Who was the guy in your story?" But it's just the constant questioning.
Yes.
And so measuring him by whether he was sober or not was actually torture, and it was pointless, and it was getting me nowhere, to the point where he went to a year-long discipleship program to get sober. And a discipleship program is something you go to, usually affiliated with a church, and it helps you grow on your spiritual journey with the Lord as a Christian, whatever. But these abusers will use Christianity as a further weapon to abuse you more. So when you send one of these guys to a place like that, they just learn the language to better manipulate you. And that's coming from someone who's a believer myself. But when it's someone who has that abusive personality and attitude and thinking problem, what happened was he went away. He learned all the language of like biblical stuff that he already had a background in, but for that entire year he stayed sober, proposed to me while he was at this program and while he was sober because he knew he could show me,
Yeah.
Grace, look how good I'm doing. All the while, he was knowing every way to speak to me. He would write me letters. He would pray for us. He would do Bible study with me. Still didn't change the fact that he was domestically abusive. I mean, to really understand what I'm saying, I would recommend people read Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft. And that would be my personal recommendation if you want to understand what do I mean by they have an abusive mindset. That'll explain it. But we got married after that, and it was right back to him using again, drugs. And by that point, I knew there's something more wrong here. Why is he an asshole to me? Why is he a jerk? Besides the fact that he's
Yeah.
gone back to use again. That whole time he was at that program, there was still a sense of he's kind of an asshole. He's kind of mean. He's kind of mean spirited, even though he's on good behavior just enough to keep me locked in. I mean, he was a wonderful partner, probably a larger majority of the time than things were turbulent.
Yes.
I recommend people don't think of things in percentages because since he was on his best behavior a little more of the time than he was bad, I was constantly weighing it. So it just felt like a math problem that I could never solve and a puzzle I could never solve. And that's what led me to be like, okay, I'll just marry him because I feel like I don't have anything to point to now. In fact, leading up to the marriage, I was actually hoping something big would happen that would allow me to get out because I knew
Yeah.
in my spirit something more is wrong here, but I couldn't call it out and say, hey, look, you did that again. We need to postpone the marriage because he was away at this program so he could be again, good enough to keep me really locked in, and I was just like, "Please, just let something big happen," because I knew he was the same person,
Yeah.
and I felt like once we got married, I was just gonna be stuck with that mistreatment all over again.
I can understand. I married mine thinking, like, I won this prize. He's now choosing me. And so he's choosing the relationship. And so my thought process was it was going to be this marriage that I had always dreamed because it was a choice he was making, if that makes sense. It was such a weird mindset, but I did, in my mind, believe that marriage was going to fix things. Not that I was even super unhappy at the beginning of my relationship, and we can talk about that on your podcast. It's just interesting. I guess it makes me feel better because I do hold a lot of judgment on myself for like how long I tolerated things and just, I mean, different things, because you say it out loud now and you're like, but why did I do that? But I think back to that moment, and there's no way I would have done anything differently, but I think that's why it breaks my heart because I wish that I would have known something different.
I feel like if I can boil my experience down to one single thing, it would really be that I never felt like I had a good enough reason to leave.
Mhm.
I never felt like because every time something would happen where I said, okay, this is my chance, this is my out, he's going to understand because something big enough happened that he's going to finally be like, okay, you have every right to leave me. I still never felt like I had a reason because what do? They tell you, you have no reason to walk away. Wow, you're overreacting. You're going to leave based on that. You're too sensitive. And if it wasn't that, he would do the flip side. Wow, Grace, I am an asshole. I cannot believe I treated you that way. You have every right to walk away right now and leave me. Sometimes he would say, you have every right to divorce me. My gosh, I can't believe I did this again. But that was all to get me to stay. And I really
Mhm.
want people to hear that. If it wasn't one thing, it was a flip. They're just going to do whatever is most effective. And sometimes what was
Yes.
most effective for me was saying, Grace, I am devastated by how I've treated you. Because again, that elicited in me, oh my gosh, he actually gets it. He is verbalizing back to me. He's able to regurgitate back to me what he did, what was wrong about it, why I shouldn't trust him again. And then that like demonstrated understanding to me, which made me stay, and then it would happen again. So I don't care what approach they take, it's still to get the same outcome with you.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think one of the big reasons why I talk now too is leaving before it's someone hitting you, right? And I think that comes back to no one needs to give you permission to feel unhappy. If you're unhappy, then that's enough. No one needs to say, yeah, that's pretty bad. If it's bad enough for you, then it's bad. But I think for me, he wasn't abusive until the last year and a half or something that I was with him. Like he did not physically hit me until the last year and a half. But now for me to look back at the relationship, I can very clearly see that that started so much earlier than that. And I wish that I would have gotten out before that. I wish that I would have known that so much sooner because almost dying and living with those memories is not anything I would wish on anybody.
Yeah, and what I meant is, of course, anybody has any reason to walk away at any point. You don't have to wait until you think something is bad enough to have a reason.
Yes.
But what I mean is, my brain needed something to feel legitimate enough because of my
Hmm.
empathy towards him. So,
Yes.
empathy was actually driving all of my decision making. And that's why I believe in something called toxic empathy, which is a whole separate subject. But toxic empathy is when empathy takes over so much that it actually pressures you internally to make certain decisions that actually directly go against your benefit and your well-being. And so I had the desire for it to finally make sense for him, for it to be a big enough instance where it would make sense, because I felt like if I left based on something that he was acting confused about, I felt sorry for him. I felt like, well, I need it to make sense to him because I need him to be able to validate in his head why this is happening. Because what do? We put ourselves in their shoes because we know so well what it feels like to be discarded by them or to feel like the relationship is rocky. So we're like, I can't fathom doing that to someone else and leaving on grounds where he feels like, well, where did this come from? And that's one of their biggest tactics. This is what he would do to me. Their biggest tactic is to act confused, genuinely confused by why, where is this coming from? Why are you doing this? Because if he can say, you walking out the door, that's coming out of left field. Why are you doing this with no warning? You're tearing apart the family. Where did this
Mhm.
come from? Acting like he's been living somewhere else. That's most effective because he knows that's going to bring you to say, oh, okay, I'll stay and I'll wait until. Like, I need to give him a fairer chance to see that things are not well with the relationship, to give him a chance to turn it around instead of just pulling the rug out. All manipulation.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And again, I just think it's shocking that, like, no matter the length of time or where we're at or our backgrounds, users are always very similar. And I think I want people to just kind of have a better idea on what grooming, isolation, what different things look like in real life, because I think those words are thrown around, but there's not much context. I think one thing that was really hard for me to understand, and I feel like I'm a pretty smart lady, but I really struggled with the fact that I was sexually assaulted in my marriage. It took me almost a full year in therapy to understand that the two could live together. And so when people say all the time that when women are assaulted, it's more often from someone that they know. In my mind, when that phrase was said, it was like, oh, it's a friend or it's a neighbor that knows you. Or I never related it to my husband or my spouse. And that was a really hard mental barrier for me to break. And that required a lot of grace within myself. And I still struggle with that. But I think it's things like that where I just want people to look at it differently and let their brains think about it differently, because I think all of us do it where we sort it into this box of what we think it looks like. And then it can't look any other way.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I remember when the sexual abuse happened or physical stuff, it was always for me, it was always framed as a clumsiness thing. He would say he was just being clumsy, he didn't mean it, he just ran into me, he just did this thing by accident.
Mhm.
So they mask that intentionality and they hide behind the illusion that it's just an oopsie thing.
Yes.
I'm bigger than you, I'm stronger than you. I just didn't know what I was doing. And that's what people miss about physical abuse. I don't know how it escalated in your story, but I just know for me it was very much like, I didn't elbow you in the nose. I was just readjusting in bed. But he would elbow me in the face when he happened to be pissed at me that night. You see, like we would wake up the next day. I
Yeah.
remember he was just like adjusting in the bed on his side and he conveniently elbowed me in the nose. And I was like, ow. And then every time I would do something like that and say, ow, he would say, oh my gosh, you're so sensitive. Grace, I just barely touched you. I was moving myself. And then he would do this thing where he would kick me in bed. He would kick me hard. And I was like, ow. And he's like, I'm just an active sleeper. One morning, after he was really mad at me, he didn't want me to go on a trip with my parents. And I said, I'm going on the trip with my family anyway. He kicked me 3 times in the back of my leg that morning. And that's when it clicked. Oh my gosh, he's doing this on purpose. But since
Yeah.
we're laying in bed, he's getting away with it.
See, and for me, because I had been so conditioned, mine was more obvious. And I will tell you my story when we talk. But I think that, again, I want people to know that because I'm sure things like that happened earlier on in my relationship. There are things that I'm thinking about now that we've spoken about that I haven't talked about publicly, but I can definitely see that now. And I can see that that would be really hard to identify in the moment and being like, oh, well, it was just an accident. And so you're dismissing this. That had to be so confusing for you. So I'm so sorry.
If we were outside of the bedroom, if we weren't laying in bed and he kicked me 3 times in the leg, I would say, oh my gosh, this is domestic abuse. But no, it was always in a situation where he could leave just enough room to explain it away. And even after he got arrested, first off, it still wasn't like super blatant. He punched a wall next to my head. So he always made sure to do things not directly on me, even though there were things done to me as well. But
Yeah.
the violence was always to intimidate. Even after that, I almost fell back into it. But I think the big thing that got me to stay away for good was thinking very logically, okay, if I go back this time, we could end up having a baby together. I had married him at this point, and he was always very adamant, we need to get pregnant. We need to have a baby right now. I want to be a dad. That was all to further his access to me, to further ties. And I'm someone who wants to have a lot of kids. I love children, but I just knew I have to get out of this. And so he weaponized that to say we need to hurry up. And I knew if I went back after he had gotten arrested, that would be the first thing on his priority list was let's have a baby because he wanted to make
Yeah.
sure I was locked in this time. And so thinking very logically about that, that's what got me to finally stick my feet in the ground and say, I'm really gonna leave this time.
I'm so proud of you and happy that you finally got away and had that thought process. I think it took me a really long time to feel like I was making any decision and that was the right one. I constantly questioned everything I did. And I think sometimes people ask me for advice of like what I would tell someone leaving an abusive relationship. And I'm kind of curious on your take on this because I agree that community is completely important. But for me, I almost think I needed to isolate myself a little bit more just so that I trusted my own thoughts and my own voice and what I needed for myself and not what someone else thought I should do for me or my situation. I think it took me gaining that confidence in myself that has made me successful today. And I'm kind of curious what your take is on that. Because I don't think isolation is healthy. I think community is healthy. But as far as rebuilding after this,
So it's interesting you say that. I actually needed to protect myself passionately from people
hmm
who were going to say anything like, it takes two to tango. Maybe you guys just weren't a good match. Maybe you're not compatible. I needed to completely eliminate any possibility of hearing that ever because
yes.
that was the main thing that was going to send me back to him was thinking, again, the fear of missing out was the big problem for me. So I self-isolated in that context. Anybody I thought could say something foolish where they just didn't understand. I had to viciously protect myself from that. However, the other thing was after my ex got arrested, I actually went back home to live with my parents. I actually didn't tell my parents for several months or more that he had gotten arrested at all. I was telling them, hey, I'm here visiting you because I'm just visiting. I came up with some excuse. They ended up finding out themselves that he got arrested. But the reason I did that is because I felt like I needed to maintain that control. Remember, I became a very
Yes.
controlling person. I needed to hold on to that ultimate control to know that this was my decision. I
hmm
almost needed the ability to keep that door propped open with him just in case I wanted to go back, because that's actually what made me successful. And this is what I want loved ones to understand. I had already made up my mind that I wasn't going back to him. But anytime I would shut that door on the possibility completely, where I had voiced to him, hey, this is done for good, don't even try, that would actually slingshot me back further into him. So
Yes.
it's very confusing. But when we had a no contact order, my ex actually thought there was a chance I was still coming back. I just told him, hey, please follow your court order. It would really show me a lot if you followed your court order. He
Mhm.
didn't at first, but then he did. And so I used that to slowly detach from him while he still thought, hey, we're probably done, but maybe there's a small chance, because that allowed me to keep that door propped open while I detached. And this sometimes sounds evil to people. How could you make him think there's a sliver of hope? You have to get rid of the guilt. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I had to tell my family, hey, just so you know, this is going to be my choice. And don't try to make the, even though I had already made up my mind, I needed everybody to give me space. I needed to keep him at bay, keep him down, while I also kept my family at bay because I needed to
Yes.
just be in complete quiet. And that's what
Well,
that
and
combined with the fear of us getting pregnant is what helped me get out.
I think that that's so I don't know if healing is the right word, but good for me to hear because I wondered if that was something so toxic that I experienced. And again, I do love and trust everyone around me, and I'm much better now at letting them voice their opinions and taking what serves me and rolling off what doesn't, right? But in that time, I think even in all types of abuse, your control is taken from you in some way, shape, or form. And so I think it's so crucial and important for any survivor to take that time to regain control in a healthy, positive way for yourself. Because there's always going
Mhm.
to be someone that tries to have an opinion or help. And so I think that that maybe leads us to our closing question, which you've kind of touched on a couple of times. But what do you feel is the most shocking thing someone said to you in your experience?
Think that's a great question. One story I would share to answer that question, I really want listeners to hear this. It goes back to my point about how, as much as you try to protect yourself from outsiders saying the wrong thing, you're going to run into people who disappoint you, and you're going to run into people who trigger you to a point where you're tempted to just go back to your abuser. I think the most shocking thing that ever happened was I was working with this domestic violence agency close to where my ex and I lived because after he got arrested, I got linked up with them for assistance. And I would go to their support group often. And then also, I was talking to a legal advocate there, and the legal advocate was just helping me with a couple little things. But I remember on the phone one day, she said to me, hey, by the way, I see in his case, he could possibly be assigned to batterer intervention program as a plea deal with his charges. Maybe he'll be assigned to the batterer program. And then she says, and that could be a positive thing for him because if he goes to the batterer program, a large percentage of a lot of times it actually helps them change. And I was like, whoa. Okay, first of all, that's incorrect. And you and I both know that, right? As domestic
Yes.
violence advocates, we know that is 1,000% can be proven wrong is incorrect
Yes.
statistically. But for some reason, this woman, and I had to rationalize it that she was on their legal team. Maybe she just meant the wrong thing. Maybe she just didn't understand. But when she said that to me, that maybe it would be a positive turning point for him if he got assigned to that as part of his plea deal. I kid you not. I almost called him, booked a flight back to him, apologized, said, I'm sorry, we need to make this work because what did that do? It triggered that fear of missing out in me.
Yeah. This is
That
his
was
moment.
just
I
my
need to be there.
that was my particular struggle, and all of a sudden, everything hinged on, "Oh my gosh, is he gonna be assigned to that and come out a different person?" So even though you're protecting yourself, you can run into someone who's even an advocate who says the wrong thing, and you're all of a sudden spiraling. That
Yes.
happened with the agency that I was working with. So my lesson in that is you have to be so rock solid in your decision that nothing is gonna change that no matter what. You have to know no matter who he goes to after you, if there's another woman he ends up with, they're going to get the same scenario with him, if not worse. You can rest your head on the pillow. I know that not that anybody wants anyone to be abused, but this is what keeps people stuck, I find.
Yes. When my abuser was arrested the first time, I was so confused. The justice system is not a place that makes any sense. Even if you have been in it, I think it is a giant pile of loopholes that makes absolutely no sense. But I remember I was so confused because I never said arrest him. He was just arrested. And his mom was telling me that I was doing this to him, which was really confusing because no one said, do you want him arrested? It just happened. And so I remember asking my victim advocate because I was like, what is my place in this? What is happening? If I wasn't here, would this still be happening? Was my question. And all she kept telling me was, you're important. And I was like, thank you. I know I'm important, but I wanted to understand if I wasn't here, if I wasn't talking to you right now, would the charges still happen? Because I never asked for him to be arrested. And she could never give me that answer. And that was one of the huge reasons why I went back to him, because I believed I was doing it to him. I was being told by everyone around me that he was going to do better. He now knew. And I was making the situation bad. And this was a police station victims advocate that couldn't give me a clear answer, that pushed me back to an abuser, someone who, in my mind, was going to say the right things and knew what to say to me. And so I trusted what was said to me rather than my own intuition. And so I think that's so interesting you say that.
Yes. I just want people to hear these stories from us and realize this is what it means to be strong.
Mhm.
Being strong isn't just making that initial decision of, I'm going to walk out the door. It's everything that comes after that. On the days when you run into something unexpected that is like, whoa, did I make the wrong choice? You're going to run into those moments. That's what being strong means is, and this isn't a competition of, even if someone is still in it, even if they're choosing to stay, it doesn't mean they're not strong. But what I'm saying is those were the hardest times for me after the fact when I ran into something and I had to learn to trust the choice that I made and know that it was the right thing.
I agree. Well, I think that's such a beautiful message to end on. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Grace. That was such a good conversation.